Well, good afternoon as we're sitting here at LTV on this beautiful afternoon, Thursday, February 6th, year 2025, here with the Hello Hello Show. My name is Haim Mizrahi, continuing with the tradition of public access and the tradition of the Hello Hello Show that's been on the air since 1980. Of course, not to fail to mention the contribution by Fraser Dougherty, Francis Ann, then of course the likes of you out there to make it your business to enhance and fortify this wonderful concept called public access. Here with us today is Joe Delia, and um, um, I. I can't, I'm not so sure that I know how to begin to introduce you because of the simple fact that I know exactly almost next to nothing about you. But the thing is that I want to communicate with the people and the people that follow me out there is that with Joe, it's a guarantee of a meaningful interaction, full of substance and sensitivity, and decades of participation in the world of music, in the reality of music and compositions and performances, and that wonderful, vast, rich experience that inevitably we're going to feel the effect of it, and we to be and to become enlightened. So first and foremost, Joe, so nice to have you here with us. And it goes without saying that this is the home of the many. That makes people feel comfortable and at ease, and to carry on with interactions.
It's so great to be here, Hannah. I'm glad we were able to get together on the time frame. We tried last week, and here we are. What did you say? February 6th, 2025.
Yes,
Amazing that we're here in 2025. To me,
yes,
that's
with all
yeah,
that implies.
yes, with all that it implies, and it's just wonderful. I have a great.
So how does one arrive to any doorstep to describe who you are and what you're all about?
Oh
And you can
goodness.
make it as short and as long as you want.
I think these days it's it's a big question. I mean, it's I like to think of myself as you know as a person who's attempting, aspiring to do the right thing as much as I can, whatever that is. And that uh, I could define myself as as a piano player, as a composer, as a musician, which I am uh, by my livelihood, by my trade. It's what I do. But I think at this point in life, I mean, I was born in 1948, so it has been a
Unbelievable.
yeah, it's and it has been a long run. So 1948 to 2025. How do I define myself as very grateful to be here? To be among the living in
Yes.
2025, which is
Yeah.
something that it still amazes and astounds me that I've made it this far, and I'm doing great. I
And
feel good, and
musically speaking, what does it spell really?
it, I it spells a long road of experience and hopefully knowledge and all that goes with it. Technique and just learning. And I think one of the great things about being at this point in my life is that you continue to you continue to grow as a person and as a musician. It's really one of the wonderful things about doing music is that as long as your chops are able to do it, as long as your ears hold up, you can you can do music for a long time. I mean, there've been amazing musicians who've gone. UB Blake, the great uh,
Yeah, yeah.
the great pianist. He was doing it till he was 98 years old and sounded great, and it was so amazing. So you could play for a long time.
Yes,
You know,
definitely. And we had an encounter with Joe Zawinul from Weather Report when he
oh,
came to
right.
to Israel, and
Yeah.
then we became friends, and then he
Wow.
became our mentor. Actually, in more ways than one. It's a long story. I won't get into it. So,
Wow.
if I
So
was, if I, and I'll tell you I'll make it very short later. But now, yeah, I have a feeling that you're the type of musician slash individual that will kind of gather, summarize, conclude, release. By doing that over and over again, reinvent yourself and reinvent your journey. Otherwise, it's so easy to find yourself just I don't want to say stepping on the same square, but uh, maybe not being aware that you're not where you should be, where you're supposed to be,
hmm
and what and so there's a clash with your personality, and as much as it should elevate you, it's doing exactly the opposite. But I have a feeling that that kind of level of efficiency is a part of your journey. Am I mistaken?
I think so. I mean, it's been such a diverse bag musically for me. Growing up, and getting here. I've thought about this yesterday. How I've listened to so much music over the years, right? And I've been influenced by so much. I heard must be might have been Eddie German's uh, show, uh, and he plays Jimmy Smith a bit, right? And I just listened to it, and I said, even though I had never really sat down and transcribed Jimmy Smith's solos note for note, some of it, you would do it, was really influenced by that guy's playing, his feel, his sensibility, and you can hear it the second the first note you hear out of Jimmy Smith, you go, "That's Jimmy Smith," you know it. And I thought, man, that's what I should be doing all the time, is just trying to play like Jimmy Smith, which I can do a little bit. I can, we did some of that
Yes.
the other night where we
Yes.
fall into some of the Jimmy Smith
I don't know how
day.
I followed through, but I
Oh
did.
no, it's and I'm saying I could kind of play that style a little bit, right?
Yeah.
And but then I thought about it and I said, man, I've listened to so much, and have been influenced by everything. People are like, well, what are your influences? Who did you listen to? Everybody, from day one. I think really until probably until we got into the 90s, and now I feel like I've everything that went up until kind of the early 70s. In a lot of ways, it had all been said on every level, from classical
Yeah,
music
correct. Yeah,
to
yeah.
jazz. George Carlin, he was asked. This was shortly after he died, and Carlin was such a great guy and a great spirit, and he loved music. And I had run into him a couple of times on gigs, so I had like you know, a little brush with him, and I loved him. But uh, this was in maybe the early 2000s. Someone asked him, well, what music do you like? And he was like, well, everything up until 1971. After 1971, he never listened to anything. That was it. He said everything that was any good was all said before
Yeah,
before.
yeah.
And in a lot it's not quite true, but in a way,
Yeah.
I think those of us from that generation kind of felt that. I mean,
But
but
certain aspects of it we are obliged to continue to listen to,
absolutely, and
you know.
things come
Like
through, and
Frank Zappa, for
I think it's
example.
a generational thing as well. I think when it comes to rock and roll and pop music, it's coming of age music. So my coming of age music went from Elvis to the Beatles to the Rolling Stones to, and it went a bit further than that, but it's for kids, especially rock and roll. And so if I'm not getting what's going on now, which I'm not so much, once in a while something comes through that I say, hey, that's pretty good, but I'm not listening to it. I'm not involved with that process as I was, of course, when I was 16 or even 25, right? So I think it's a generational thing in terms of especially pop culture and pop music, right?
Now, what about the commitment that you have towards the instrument itself? I mean, do you have like at the beginning? Obviously, it's obvious you pick up the meaning of that formation of relationship. You know, you get to know the instrument, and you get to know it more and more and more until you inevitably become complacent because you want to focus on other things. You
Right.
got it, you got it.
Yeah.
And but the instrument cannot tolerate this phrase "I got it."
Right.
It wants your attention still, nevertheless, as if it's the early stages of that process. So, do you find yourself sometimes catching yourself observing the instrument and trying to do the best that you can, still, nevertheless, technically speaking?
Yeah. I think practice. You know, of course, you can't.
You know what I
You
mean? That you
can't.
hear the instrument tells you, Joe, Joe, where I need more from you.
Yes, right. And of course, it's all about practice. It's all
Yes.
about shedding. And through the years, I've had my periods where you really, as we say, get into the woodshed and do it because if you don't, you're just gonna fail at it. You're just not gonna be. But to sit and I play every day, and I practice. I distinguish between sort of playing and performing and doing it and practice. Practice is one thing, but performing, even though we're practicing the craft when we perform and
Yes, of
when we
course.
play out, it's not the same as serious practice. And
Yeah.
there have been, of course, periods, and you're a musician, you know this. You don't get those rudiments that you have on drums without sitting for hours, endless hours, working it out. And I've done that in my life. But and I go in and out of those periods now, Haim. I mean, where I'm saying I really want to, up this one aspect of my game, of my playing, and I'll do it. I've worked recently more on getting my reading better. It's difficult. Piano is a tough axe to really sight read well, and I'm a decent reader, because I have background in classical music
And
and
still, you
and
find that at the edge of that challenge
yeah,
staring at
it's
you.
very challenging. I mean,
Yes.
especially on piano. I always envy the flute player who has, he's playing in a concert key first of all, and he uh, is reading one line at a time. I'm
Yes,
thinking
but he needs to pay attention to all your charts
that's
too.
that's right, and that's with all due respect to flute players everywhere, right?
Yes.
We have a wonderful flute player who comes in on Monday night.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Jed
Yeah. I think
Jed Feldman is
yes.
terrific, and he can read anything. We
Yes.
do, but piano, you could you're looking at two staffs, and there's the possibility that you could have 10 voices written on one beam. Okay, so say sing a Chopin in C sharp, with seven sharps. You could have 10 voices on a chord, just one little event, just the first part of the bar, and you have to like decipher every one of those instantly. But then there's just in one bar, if it's a row of 16th notes,
Yeah.
you have 16 of those
Yes. Of course.
that you have to like disseminate and play. It's hard, right? That's kind of a worst case scenario,
Yeah. Yeah.
I think. But so the reading part of it, I try to get my reading better, and I think that it has gotten better. But there are readers, I've encountered pianists who could they could look at an orchestral score and just play every staff on it and do the transpositions in their head. It's a very kind of savant uh, ability to do that, right? But if I go into the shed, it's more about trying to get the reading together, because I think technically, you're born with whatever natural technique. I'm sure that you know this, playing drums, that we have a certain amount of God-given gifts that we have in terms of sheer technique.
Yes.
Uh,
But let's just say that what you just described, that difficulty, when it becomes second nature, then what? Okay, so let's just say that we can put that to rest because we have achieved that kind of level of competence, and so then what? What is really, because this is only so far as to get you to a point where now you're just starting to think about the essence
it's so
of your engagement.
it's such it's such a great concept that you're hitting on, and I think what happens is it all kind of merges and coalesces when you're playing. You don't Something happens, especially if you're playing jazz and you're improvising. You're not really thinking about uh, each individual mode that goes with, and I'm talking a little technically,
Yeah,
but if you're blowing over changes, you're improvising over chord changes, you're not necessarily consciously thinking of every mode. Your hands and your mind just do it. So it's pulling from all this experience that you got in the woodshed when you were practicing, right? And that just magically happens, right? So the more you practice and the more you play, the more you play on those changes, the more second nature it becomes, and then uh, you get this language. You get this. Improvisation is it's it's a wonderful gift to be able to do it on any level. And I think as you're because you're talking about musical concepts here and what makes you a musician and what makes me a musician. I think spontaneity has a lot to do with it. I tend to not play the same. I try not to play the same thing every time. You know,
yeah. But do you ever find yourself being able to impress yourself and to, because I don't think that, I think that any musician thinks like this, it's called cheating if you're happy about what you're doing and you feel so proud. But I remember that my first time when I tried to uh, um, the number one pianist in Israel, actually known internationally. Um, came to me one day, and we have endless hundreds and hundreds of underground recordings that are very free by nature. We're backed up by academia's infrastructure. We
right,
learned a thing or two, and then therefore we could have be reckless with the license.
right.
He approached me and he said, Haim, I have to confess, all these years that you were talking to me about your concept, I didn't listen. And now I cannot not listen anymore because I realize that what you're talking about is real. And after all these years, I already know nothing about what you're talking about. But I always say like this.
Yeah,
So can you give me a crash course? Can you give me like let's sit half an hour and put it in a nutshell for me?
right,
And I said, of course. I appreciate your honesty. Sit down. But I said, don't be wishy-washy with me. Huh? I'm gonna be all over you like a wet towel.
right,
And we're sitting there and I'm trying to eradicate all these habits. And I can do it technically speaking without knowing no melody, no harmony, knowing of the nature of melody and of the nature of harmony, but not knowing the essence of it, which I didn't have to. And and I eradicated all these things that he could get away with murder with them. And I overemphasized and emphasized. And I'm telling you this half an hour because I saw him clean
right.
and completely ready. He emptied his vessel completely. Was absolutely blew my mind how much progress a person with such incredible knowledge like him, which is easy to do it with a knowledgeable individual,
Right.
can take it so far. And then he looked at me, and since that moment, he stopped looking at me when we were recording. He said, I realized what's at stake if I look at you.
Right.
So I'm just going to be leaving myself to be on my own and we're gonna meet at the end of the session. I mean, with our minds, we're gonna meet and we're gonna check it out and all this and all that. So I'm thinking, uh, are we missing out so much today that the greats lost their relationship with the instrument itself and the curiosity because they really know everything? But obviously, we know that that's not the case. So, 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 what is the culprit? What is the reason why all these greats don't find themselves, whether directly, intentionally, or unintentionally, or indirectly, reinventing themselves apropos the instrument?
Hmm.
I know it's a crazy
No,
question, but
and I think it has to do with the spontaneity, especially if if we're talking about uh, any kind of improvisational music. If we're talking about jazz, or we're talking about, it doesn't have to be jazz, but if we're talking about something that's purely improvisational, you can't really you can't really put your finger on it, Haim. You know, and I think that's part of it. We can't over intellectualize how it happens or why it happens. So it's a culmination of knowledge. It's a culmination of chops, of technique and natural technique and ability, right? Uh, and then it's that spirit that takes over, and then it's happening. You're talking about, do you do things do I do things to impress myself?
it's
Not
a good place to be, you
it,
have to
it's a,
admit.
but not per se. But once in a while, I'll say that was pretty good, or that I executed something the way I hoped it would,
Yes,
uh, the
yes,
way I hoped it would come out.
yeah.
But you're always working with the limitations of your technique and of your knowledge and of your theoretical knowledge and this accumulation of musical input that you've gotten over the years from Elvis Presley to John Coltrane.
Yes, yeah.
And that's sort of where I'm at. I'm all over the place in terms of style and experience, because I've loved so much music. I mean, as kids, we would, if there was a record in the house, and there were only so many, and it was a household full of people, there were a lot of kids in my house, we would just wear these friggin' records out.
Yeah.
You would just play, and it didn't matter if it was, Oklahoma or Elvis, or there was nothing too erudite in that household, right? And then Beatle records, we would get them in, or Bob Dylan, the early Bob Dylan records. We just play them until they were worn out. There was no
Oh yeah.
grooves left on the records, so
Yeah.
it's been a trip. But I think that it's the you were down on Monday night in Montauk at Talk. You came in and played with the band, and it's a wonderful experience, because the first part of the night, we have a very good house band. There's James Bernard playing drums, and Doug Broder usually is there on bass. He's always there on bass. He wasn't there last
Yes.
week when
Mhm.
when you were there. And Greg McMullen. We have the house band, and Jed Feldman, who I mentioned. So in the first, we play from 7 to 10, and the first hour we almost always play something of a jazz set. So we can cover, we like to play a few Chick Corea tunes. I play some Dave Brubeck stuff, because it's
Yeah.
nice and it's
Of course.
compositional and it's
Hmm.
great stuff. And when the band plays, and we'll pull standards out. We'll do. Uh, we're able to actually use that first. It's not a jazz gig per se, talk on Monday night, but the first 45 minutes we're playing tunes, and it's an opportunity to play jazz in front of a receptive audience, because they like whatever we're playing. It doesn't matter. We could be playing, we play everything from from Hank Williams to John Coltrane to the Ramones over the course of the night. We play every and my original stuff and Greg's stuff, and we cover everything. We play a lot of blues, but the first 45 minutes we typically play jazz titles, And it's a wonderful time to just get into that head and say, okay, this is what we're doing. And everybody's very well trained in playing them. And when the band is hitting it, when we're and Monday night when you were there was a particularly good night. I'm not sure when you walked in whether you were there early on in the
Yeah,
early on
when
in
you
the night.
were actually you took the break, and then the singer, that
Yes,
girl, so powerful, very
yeah,
impressive.
yes, right,
Wow.
yeah, exactly, exactly. And who was it?
And then
Oh yes, and
Winston,
oh, and then Winston,
three
Winston
tunes,
came.
very
Yeah,
nice.
so of course.
Yeah.
So we,
Oh yes, it's like a winning
yeah,
combination.
it's such a cross section. To talk
Yes.
about Monday night a little bit because you were there
Yeah.
and you came up and played
Yeah.
great with us, and we had people sit in. It it started out. It's really about 2.5 years ago that we did well. Yeah, that's when the program really started. Was 2.5 years ago. Actually, we had done it 3 times before COVID. We thought, well, we could have this concept where we have a house band come in on an off night, a Monday night, and see if people are receptive to it. So it would be a house band and kind of this invitational session, where if somebody knew me or somebody in the band, they would be brought up. Clearly, not an open mic was not. This was not the concept. I didn't want to be the guy with a clipboard calling out names of.
Yeah. Yeah.
You
Of
had
course.
to be able to do something well to get up
Of
there.
course. Of course.
And we did 3 of them before COVID. And then before the fourth gig, COVID kicked in and it was over, right?
Yeah.
And then 3 years later, Mike Ness, who owns the club, called and said, "You guys want to try it again?" Right? And we went in, and there was something about it that appealed to people in Montauk.
Oh
And we
yes.
did it every Monday.
And it
And
was completely blown away. I mean, there's sometimes I used to come here, there couldn't get in even.
yeah, it's really been wonderful. And it's as I've thought about what is really going on there, because some nights it just is funny as hell. Sometimes the music is like off the charts. It's always good, right? But it's always different, and it's sometimes just so funny, and people leave with such a sense of joy from hearing everybody play. And I thought, well, what really is the concept here? And it occurs to me that it's kind of it's kind of like theater, and that the audience is it's like living theater. The audience is part of the whole experience.
Production.
Yeah, the whole production.
Yes. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
as we go through the night, we do start out by playing like some, as I said, some straight jazz stuff, and then we'll look through the house and we'll say, oh, this one's here, this one's there, this one's here, and the people who we know are going to come up, and
Yeah.
how to slot them in and keep a nice dynamic
Fluency.
and
Yes.
flow of the show
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
keep it right. And it's really been interesting, and the people.
But that's how we save the world, every
It's
time,
so.
all over again.
Oh man,
Of course.
yeah, it's
In my eyes, it's a no-brainer.
yeah, and it has uh, that it's on the East End. It's the best kept secret in the Hamptons, but not the best kept secret in Montauk,
Of
because
course, of
everybody in
course,
Montauk knows about it, and
I would
they
hope
come.
so.
But if you're west of East Hampton or
Oh yeah, yeah, I
Amagansett,
know.
you don't know about it,
And
right?
even if you know it, nobody go there.
Yeah,
It's like,
right.
what the
Nobody's going
heck?
to drive. Nobody's going to drive
Which
that
is
far.
probably a good idea.
But it's so great, and uh, there are people like we have one singer, Nicky, who's great, and
Yes.
who
Yeah.
and he has a particular role in this theater event. So I know at a certain point he's going to come up, and he always ends the show, right? And then Annie Trezor, who you mentioned,
Yes.
she comes in, and she typically does a Bob Dylan tune or
Yeah.
two or
And
three.
I don't know how she's not well known and famous. She's really
She's
powerful.
she's wonderful, and she is
Uh,
really well known out here.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah. I have a feeling also that she has the potential to become really much greater than she is. She has the potential to be
I,
much
I
greater.
lost your mic.
Oh, you did? Yeah. Do you hear me now? Do you hear yourself?
I lost. Now I've got me and probably have you back.
You hear yourself?
You're all
That's
we're good. We're
okay.
all good. Yeah. No.
It's
No.
okay. It's okay. I lose my hearing also
It's,
now and
yeah.
then.
Yeah. I can't tell the difference if they're on or
So
off.
yeah, no.
No, Annie,
It seems like she's a ripe field where you can really plant anything and it will come out. It's
and she plays all over all over town. Another one is Francine Whitney, who is a very good standard singer. So if it's a time to do, to give you an example, 2 weeks ago we did Lush Life, which is really one of the it's the great Billy Strayhorn masterpiece, I think. And she came up and sang this with with such proficiency. She's and it's a hard song to sing, and we did it without really so much without rehearsal, and it's a tough song, and the band played it so beautifully. And it was, these are the kind of things musically that can happen on Monday night. So anything goes, and if somebody like you're saying Winston came in, suddenly the band is playing reggae music spot on, and it's just beautiful, and it's been one of the highlights of.
Yes, definitely, and I'll make sure to mention it more often than not here as we. Um, so Joe Delia is here with us on
How
Thursday.
how are we time wise?
We have another half hour, but don't
Oh, we
worry
do.
about
Oh,
that.
wow.
It goes
Holy
by
cow!
fast, yeah.
It's a
But thank God we have enough hour because now I'm going to start just asking you the real questions.
I love it. Go for it.
But I mean, no, I mean the
I'm going to change glasses while you're talking.
sure, by all means, yeah, no problems. You can do.
I'm sitting here.
That's the beauty of this show. I
I'm
can
sit-
answer my. You know that I started texting people, so
Yeah. No, I'm
so
sitting here wearing shades.
yeah,
In the middle of.
yeah.
Day,
Here you go.
This is
So,
like ridiculous.
but my potential listeners and viewers and followers are extremely intelligent and sensitive, and they know a thing or two about. Because if they can tolerate 1 hour of monologue by me, believe me, they can tolerate any intensity out there that comes their way. I remember that one day, one person came to me, and I couldn't believe that he admitted. He said, "Listen, the other day I was watching you, and it was the first time that I watched you, and then I looked at you, and I said, this cannot be real. This guy is not real. There's no way." It was like because I knew it was an hour show, and it was already 5 minutes, and you started talking. I said, "There's no way you can keep up with this." So I ended up watching the whole show only because I was anticipating that I'm going to witness you failing. And then I realized that the hour went by and I fell in love with you.
That's right. Well, you have a.
But the thing is, it's the implementation of, again, I can go back to the question of, will you ever wake up in the morning and when you go to your instrument, supposedly to practice,
Right.
will you take a second look at it? Will you kind of go down and see the different angles of it,
Yeah.
size it, as if you kind of just saw it a couple of times before, and this is like still in that early phase of trying to find out what's in front of you,
Yeah.
but you know that behind you there's a full power of knowledge and experience, but still you want to abandon it because you really want to get a hold to start that process all the way from the beginning, because you need to go back to square one,
Right.
back to basics,
Right.
and from there, erect yourself into a secondary revelation or understanding. People, you can hold your breath as long as you want. This is not going to happen. This is not something that happens, if ever. For the longest time, I asked myself, how come? And then I abandoned the question, because even if I was to get an answer, it won't be what I need to hear. I need to hear by my own admission and my own experience. And through that, I will understand about your nature, because our nature is not different.
It's and you're getting back to a question that you asked earlier.
Yes,
and
but I will add to it. I will add to it a layer where I would say, so, uh, uh, you need to also. But I'm sure that you understand that level of decency and the making sure of not compromising anything in the process of trying to do exactly the opposite.
Right.
yeah,
Yep.
is something that should make it easier on you because you're intelligent, you're sensitive, you're enlightened, and so much more. So people have the skills and have what it takes, but still, nevertheless, don't find themselves in that setup.
I think, and I understand the intention of the or the inference of the question or the heart of the question, and I think for me it really has to do with the spontaneity and the moment. So I could sit down, whether it's on my instrument or or I could walk into LTV studios and it's a different piano and it just has this wonderful feel and just sit down and play something spontaneously and say that was fucking good.
Yes.
Okay,
Hmm.
that was spontaneous. That was in the moment, and that's at the heart. It's not looking at the instrument in a different way, or it's what came out in that moment, right? A couple of the pianists that I admire. I mean, forget it. You talked about Joe Zawinul. I mean, the list goes on of, you know, and McCoy Tyner, who that's good. You're good, man. Jarrett and McCoy Tyner, who especially Keith Jarrett, because he could do it for so long and so sustained, and his technique was uh, beyond the pale, and his creative process and this just relentless uh, amount of uh, ideas and creativity that was coming out of him at all times. He could just sit down at the piano and improvise. And I believe drawing from compositions that he had written and motifs that he motifs that he would develop in that improvisation. Uh, is it's an approach and a thing that I liked very much was what Jarrett could do and was unique. No one else really quite did that, where it was just like this free association, right? I could sometimes, I'm not saying that I could play like Keith Jarrett, God forbid, I'm not comparing myself, but I can get into that head. So what you're talking about, that play, there are times where I could sit down and I could just play and that free association comes about and the motifs come about and the development and the theme and variation and all of this stuff. I'm saying, I'm doing this, man.
Yes.
I'm really playing. But how do you manage to at that level at the drop of a hat? When the red light goes on and it's I think you can somehow do it by rote to a degree. In other words, I could, if there were a piano here right now, and you said, "Okay, do some free association. Here's your instrument." Just I could get it going, and I think it would be for me passable, but it might not be on the same level as that moment where it's really everything is coming together. Am I making sense
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
of
yeah,
this
yeah, yeah, yeah.
at all?
I would say more. I'm talking more about your direction is good. That's exactly you hit it in the heart of it. Uh, that he, uh, it's almost reconnecting with those sensations of like when you say when you were young and you could either play it or listen to it about 150 times and
Right,
you stop counting and it doesn't matter that
right.
it's never too much, it's never that many, it's just a way of life, you know what I mean?
Yes, right.
So it's just like even with with my friend that plays, I challenged him, after all these years, and he's a professor. He doesn't need my crap and all this, but I said, you know what, you're really getting on my nerves. You posting things on Facebook that I say, what is he doing?
Yeah.
I'm telling myself. So I'm telling you now, what are you doing? Why are you doing something that you can replace with your greatness? It's just like it's beyond me. So that means you cannot just like need to look or search for the right moment. There's no such thing as right moment that serves a state of mind or a mood. It's a way of life. So you have to follow that mustness.
Right.
And of course I said, and I don't have to give you the details because you already know we did it. We did it all the time, thousands of times. And I urged him not to go back to find out why, but start right now to go to the direction that you were aware of,
Right.
you know about, and you can execute and do it.
Right.
So do it.
Right.
And what does he do? 10 minutes later, I get a notice, and he posted something, and he did something, and great, and I just wrote him, uh, um, good step in the right direction.
Right.
I was like literally adamant and less than enthusiastic, but at least I'm telling him, fuck an A, whatever,
Yeah.
friggin' A.
Yeah.
Yes. Now, from there, you must go higher.
Right.
So that means he thought he reached that height, and that height is temporary. It's just it's another step. So, and he knows about all that and so many others, but I don't have access to others. I have access to him, and he has so much influence on so many people. When he posted these 5 minutes, he got comments that were genuine from all people that usually just call him maestro for any crap that he posts. Right. But now it was for real. Right. So the world needs that because the world accepts the blessing of our playing and creation, but it also, at the same token, has zero tolerance for mediocrity. Right. You cannot save the world with mediocrity. That's my belief. Right. So it's really up to us at the end of the day to say, hey, we can really do it brilliantly.
Right. Yes. Conversation is reminding me of. Did you ever listen to stuff like Albert Eiler, Chicago Art Ensemble?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Paul. Actually, Bob James was before
he was good.
went full circle and
Yes.
became. I don't know if you remember Bob James.
Of course
Bob James Explosion. The early.
And he is the calmest.
Cecil Taylor. These were. I think I went through a weird period in the '70s, and sometimes people give me the rock and roll world. Uh, I can't believe that there are certain things that happened between, I don't know, 1971 and 1978 that I just didn't hear. Like I kind of missed out on, believe it or not, on Led Zeppelin and all that stuff. I mean, I heard a little bit of it. I mean, I knew it was there, but I went through this period where that was the music that I was listening to, was all this absolute free atonal jazz, which I loved. And what I loved most about it was the spontaneity and how it depended on reaching this plane musically and mentally and emotionally and at that moment for it to be good. So you could play for an hour. You could say that one was really good. And sometimes it was like, no, it was okay. But when everybody was on the same plane and everybody was just in that same space, the music depended on the spontaneity. It was there for that moment and then gone. I love
Yes. Yeah.
Carla Bley and Paul Bley. Cecil Taylor
Yes,
was a genius technician, and
correct. But for example, take if because you mentioned Cecil Taylor, Cecil Taylor would be the genius of the era and the initiator of that kind of style.
right,
But in terms of what I'm talking about, he's probably generations away from that kind of modernistic alternative
right,
touch of the day because of the equipment, because of the access to things that those days it was
right,
like you have to work with what you have, which is next to nothing.
right,
But also he would indulge vis-a-vis that which is cliche, because abstract expressionism supposedly came through abstract rather through the expression of abstracts. So me shying away from abstract
right,
and creating something that is sideways, like a side product of it that eventually will bring to life the abstract. Nobody would know about it.
right,
Nobody would even understand what it means to operate from different directions in order to reach abstract. That's what I do as a painter. What I do is I achieve abstract expressionism simply by focusing on my technique. I'm so full of joy uniting with my technique, with my ability to execute,
yes,
then I'm celebrating my ability and feeling narcissistic to to a degree of extreme pain.
right,
Okay, and I know that I can indulge in being narcissistic because at the end of the session it will just evaporate into the thin air.
yeah,
It's not something
yes,
that's going to stay with me as a
no,
as a as
no,
a as a
no,
carved.
and that's a great point. I heard someone, I'm forgetting who it was, saying that in a lot of ways, jazz should not even be recorded because it's that of the moment, like you're saying. In other words, it's played and it disappears into thin air, and that's it. But of course, we want to capture
Yeah,
it. We want to
yeah,
hear it. The other records that I was listening to in that period around 71, 72, and we were just crazy about Miles Davis. You know, starting with "Feet of Kilimanjaro," "In a Silent Way," "Bitches Brew," "On the Corner," all of those records,
yeah.
one after the other. Those were the second those records came out. We just were, but that wasn't free jazz. It wasn't Cecil Taylor. It wasn't Chicago Art Ensemble.
But focusing on his technique alone
It
was
was Miles,
intense.
and it was so intense. And talk about rhythm sections that he had. I mean, he did at one point he had Jarrett and Chick Corea
Yeah,
play, and I saw those guys play at the. It was probably the Village Gate or the Vanguard a couple of times, and they were phenomenal. Weather Report, the first
the
record you're
Village
talking
Gate.
about,
Oh my
Sourdough,
God, you're
when
saying
Miroslav Vidas was playing bass. He was the first one. He was
there's
before Jocko, and
Pastorius.
then Jocko came
Jack,
along. So it's all, the situation
I
with
saw Pastorius on Lone Star, 15th and 5th. Remember that Lone Star, the club? Lone Star,
no,
15th and the corner of 15th and 5th. 1 5 and 5. And he played with Richard T.
yes,
And I
who I
was
love
like,
too,
what? That
who
was
I love too, and
1983.
and who could be further apart than Richard T. and Cecil Taylor?
Yeah,
So you talk about
yeah.
you
And
talk about influences. I heard all these guys, and I think I got a little bit from all
no,
of them, which is why my playing is so screwy to begin with. It's like, what is this guy doing?
I took lessons with Kenwood Denard. He played with the Gil Evans Orchestra at Sweet Basil for
Right?
many, many years.
Yes.
And he played with Bush Rock. Remember Bush Rock? He played
Yeah.
with Richard T.
Yes.
And
Right.
Richard T had the keyboards this big.
Yeah.
And he would be
Yeah.
like a
Richard
god
was
and a half.
phenomenal. It's stuff I loved as well.
Crazy, absolutely.
When a friend of mine, this would have been in 72, a very dear friend of mine, Pete Allen, who is a great singer from up around Nyack. He lived in Nyack, and a longtime friend of mine was auditioning for Blood, Sweat, and Tears. So David Clayton Thomas had left the group. Bobby Colomby, who was really the de facto leader of Blood, Sweat, and Tears, and at that time had a house up by Nyack, which is where our house was, and uh, and Peter was second or third in line to replace David Clayton Thomas. Right? And Peter calls me up and he goes, I'm going over to Columbia's house. Do you want to come over? You know, he was just going to meet up with him. And Bobby had this house in New City, New York, right? And upstairs was state of the art studio that looked down into this other room, but it was a recording studio. And Columbia now was now an executive at Columbia Records, and also the leader of Blood, Sweat, and Tears. And we knock on Bobby's door. He opens the door up. He's like, and he goes, "You guys aren't going to believe this shit." And that was the first thing he said. We didn't know him from. We just knew that he was like this kind of rock star guy who lived in Rockland County. He was auditioning my friend. And we said, "What are you talking about?" He said, come in, quick." And he takes us to a room just exactly like this with tapes on the wall. And he puts on this cassette tape. And he says, "Listen to this shit." And we just hear this bass playing that is out of this world. Nobody had ever heard anything like this. And we're like, what is that? Who is that? And he goes, "It's this guy named Chaco." And we say, "Really?" And he said, "Not only that, but he's upstairs right now."
Oh my God.
And we were like, "What?" He said, "Yeah, he just got here today from Miami." So Columbia, it was the day that Jaco Pastorius arrived in New York from Miami. And
Unbelievable.
he's upstairs. Maybe it was the day after. He's upstairs, and we go in, and there's Chaco sitting in the control room, and a rock star, an English rock star, Ian Hunter. So apparently, Columbia was producing this session, and because he had brought Jaco up, was giving him a studio gig, playing with what couldn't have been further from Jaco Pastorius' music, but it was a session. He was
Yes.
playing the session.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
So Columbia stops the session, and this was like his almost like his pet genius musician that he
Yes. Yeah.
had there,
That's a
like
good
his
way.
discovery.
Nice description.
Is that's funny? And he said, "Jaco, go into the studio and show these guys that thing that you were doing before." And Jaco goes, and he's got the fretless bass that he basically designed, and he walks into the studio, plugs it in, and he just takes, and he had those hands, and
Yeah.
he just starts going like this, bong, bong, playing those overtones,
Yes. Yeah.
and the room is just filling. It sounded like a cathedral organ or something. It's just going bong, bong, and we were all like flabbergasted. So
Yes.
now the next night, there had been a jazz club in Nyack, New York, called the Office, and everybody put the name. It was a little corner bar. It's a hole in the wall, right? I'll make this quick because we're going to
Yeah.
run
Yeah.
out of
Yeah.
time.
It's fine.
But it's a good story. Now this is like day 3 of Pastorius being in Rockland County. So he, the Office bar was owned by a guy named Jackie DePietro, who was a jazz. He was a Berkeley music school graduate who was like a big band drummer, and he was a good big band drummer. And he took over his dad's bar, turned it into a jazz club, but it was a hole in the wall. And people from major acts from all over would come in and play in this little joint in Nyack. Bill Evans played his last gig at the Office bar, but on Wednesday nights it was a jam session, and they would have these old guys like Arnie Lawrence and Marky Markowitz and these guys up there in the rhythm section. So I walk into the office on Wednesday night, and who is sitting there? This is like literally the night after the thing, right? It's Jaco sitting at the
Amazing.
bar, and I go right up to him. I go, "Jaco, goddamn, what's happening? So great to see you." And he's like, "Yeah, man," and he's going, "This is the worst shit I ever heard in my life." Talking about, and they're playing like Satin Doll, and they're great musicians,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
but he
Right.
just goes, "This is the worst shit I ever." And we started having this talk about basses and all this stuff. And at a certain point, word kind of got out that there was this presence,
Phenomena.
but nobody knew
Yeah.
anything about it, right? And me and Jocko and Jackie on
Love it.
drums and another musician, Danny Tone, got up there, and it was just freeform. It
Amazing.
wasn't a tune, and people were just floored. So cut to. I'm going to make this quick because
Yeah.
there is a. So
We
that
got, we
was
got 4 minutes. So
that was the third day of Jaco Pastorius being in New York. Now, whatever it was, 15 years later, I was playing with I was David Johansen, the rock singer for years, right? And we were in our like home bar, which was called Tramps on 15th Street. And after hours, it was 4 o'clock in the morning, and I go in. Actually, I went down into the catacombs, which was the basement of the bar, and I was going down there to do whatever I was doing back in those days, and opened the door. Harvey Brooks, Jaco Pastorius, and Paul Butterfield. It was like rock and roll heaven,
oh my God.
in this little
Amazing.
closet
Yeah,
doing
yeah,
whatever
yeah.
they're doing. They go upstairs and they start playing. Now, this was the end of Jaco's run, which we knew because we followed him,
Yeah.
that he had this meteoric rise and then,
And then,
this
of course,
descent.
inevitable.
And at
right?
that point, Haim, at that point, it was so sad. He was on the way out, right? He gets up there, and these three famous, brilliant musicians. They're fumbling around on the stage at Tramps, and then Jaco came out by himself. But it's after hours, so it wasn't like a show or anything. And he put the bass on, and he played one of the famous Weather Report things, and it had mistakes in it. It was just very, very sad.
Yeah.
And then I went up and played with him, and probably played Satin Doll. I swear to God,
I love it.
Isn't that the craziest thing? And it was just a sad thing. And Jaco, and I just played whatever tune. It's like 5 o'clock in the morning now, and it stopped playing. Go over to the corner of the bar. Jaco's there, and I had to go up and say hello to him. And he was so down and out. And
1 minute.
I said, Jaco, yeah, this will be it. I said, Jaco, it's so wonderful to play with you, and I played with you before the day that you came into New York, the day after you came in New York at this little place in Nyack. And he looked at me and said, I remember that, man.
I love it.
How beautiful was that?
Yeah.
And that just, when he said that he had remembered that after what he had been through in those 15 years, it just was more than I could take.
Yes.
And then 2 weeks later, Jaco was gone.
That's a sad
And not
story,
to end on a sad note.
But still, he was a grown up. He had his choices. People make their choices, and then that's the kind of life they live. I come from a house where my father also and never experienced the greatness that he deserved because he was unfortunately in doing things that usually shorten people's lives.
What was that?
But, I mean, with my father, it's like just any other. If you mess with the devil will shorten your life.
Yeah.
But anyway, we just wanted to mention we got 2 more minutes. Joe Delia is here with us, and this is not going to be the last time. This is just the first time.
No,
Next time we'll really dig into the heritage of your long list of. We'll impress the world. I want to impress the world together with you, and to give you a hug verbally and emotionally, and to make sure that the community out there know for sure who we're dealing with and who having you as a person, as a commodity. In the shape of what you're doing for the community and all that, and it shouldn't be unnoticed. And we're going to be here tomorrow as much as we were here yesterday and as much as we're here this afternoon. Thursday afternoon, February 6th, 2025, here with the Hello Show, and I'll give you the last word.
Only to tell you how, first of all, how enjoyable this hour has been. It's really been great, and glad that we're connecting, on this level, and also playing.
And you promise me you're going to be here again, of course.
Absolutely,
At least
part
half
two.
a dozen times is minimum.
Yeah, once I get started, I can't shut up, and I apologize for taking the last 20 minutes until.